the diagram I had drawn about the organization of how the flows go between each of the areas and how everything was entwined was something that was brought out to show that the silos were really, really detrimental. Because again, every single leader of one of those departments was looking down and being able to see where the connectors were between each of those departments, and that they couldn't work in silo. Working in silo was what was causing the issues, because the interconnections between them all, if something didn't happen in one, the knock-on effect further round the diagram and the flow was then felt, but they couldn't see the connections because they were in the silos. So that's probably a
Right.
really bad explanation of that diagnostic pattern recognition layer. And I really wish I could give concrete examples, but I don't think legally it would be a good idea for me to do so. But
I'd
I hope
really
that
like to
explains a
keep you
little
out of
bit. It
jail.
is, yeah, I'm not really built for going to prison, to be honest. Although I have to say, I mean, 3 meals a day, probably 8 hours sleep at night, a bit of exercise, and no one disturbing me at times. I mean, it's got its plus sides.
It certainly does.
And I have to say, I think the prison system in the UK might be slightly different to the US. So
It
I'm not saying I'd
certainly
want to go to
is.
prison in the US.
That's right.
But do you think that explains enough on that diagnostic aspect? Because and that's actually another thing with my brain, because my brain works in patterns. I'm going to admit, I really struggle then to explain that in a linear manner, which talking involves.
I think pattern recognition can come in a wide variety of forms, but I think one of the most important is to understand how people approach the world, how they make decisions, and recognizing that there is a pattern of behavior that happens with people who are accustomed to a particular view of the world and accustomed to a way in which they're making decisions. And so, my best sort of example of this was when I was working somewhere, and it became quite clear that the sort of overarching executive, the CEO equivalent, um, wasn't going to call the shots. He or she expected every sort of manager of divisions, right, to sort of make the decisions around what we were going to do first, what we were going to do, what were the priorities, all of these things. And, sometimes you walk into an office or a building and an institution, and you say, okay, the executive is quite clear. The CEO knows what they want. They know how they want to do it. And your job is to execute. But this one was very interested in delegating. And the problem was, if you had somebody at the top of a division who was looking for, leadership at the very, very top, you weren't going to find it. You needed to take a stand. And there were some people who did very well in that set of circumstances, and there are other people who just don't. They don't have the creativity or the perspective or whatever it is, the magic sauce. But the patterns around the way in which people behave become very important. And and that also sort of dictates the chief of staff role, certainly, I think.